The discovery. Eleanor Voss had always believed that retirement would be peaceful. At 67, with her silver-streaked hair and comfortable cardigan, she'd settled into a quiet rhythm in her countryside home. Her prize-winning garden was her greatest joy, rows of tomatoes and zucchini plants that had won her 3 county fair ribbons. That morning in early spring, she discovered something that would change everything. Between her tomato plants lay a creature that shouldn't exist, a small dragon, no larger than a beagle, with emerald scales that caught the morning light. Its left wing was twisted at an unnatural angle, and blood seeped from a wound at the base of its skull. Eleanor had spent 51 years as a veterinarian. She'd seen injured animals of every kind, but never anything like this. The creature's breathing was shallow, its amber eyes closed, tiny chest rising and falling with effort. "What in the world?" she whispered, kneeling beside it. Her practical mind told her it was impossible. Dragons were myths, stories told to children. But her veterinarian instincts were stronger. Whatever this creature was, it was dying. Eleanor carefully lifted the small dragon, surprised by how light it felt despite its apparent density. Its scales were warm to the touch, and she could feel a faint heartbeat against her palm. She carried it inside, preparing her old examination table one last time. For 2 weeks, Eleanor worked tirelessly. She set the broken wing, cleaned and stitched the head wound, and administered antibiotics. During her examination, she'd found something strange, a small metal device embedded at the base of the creature's skull, leaking a clear fluid that seemed to cause inflammation. She removed it carefully, storing it in a specimen jar without quite knowing why. The dragon, for that's what she'd decided it must be, remained unconscious through it all, making only soft chirping sounds in its sleep. Eleanor began calling it Pip after those gentle sounds. When Pip finally opened his eyes on the 15th day, Eleanor felt her heart skip. Those amber eyes held intelligence, fear, and complete confusion. Where am I?" Pip's voice was a surprising tenor, far too sophisticated for his small size. Eleanor set down her teacup carefully. "You're safe. You were hurt, and I've been taking care of you." Pip tried to move, wincing as his healing wing protested. I don't remember anything. How did I get here? What am I?" The confusion in his voice was heartbreaking. Eleanor had seen amnesia in animals before, but never anything this complete, this human-like in its distress. "You're a dragon," she said gently. "And you're going to be just fine." Over the following months, Eleanor became Pip's teacher and guardian. She showed him books, taught him to read, helped him understand the world around him. Most importantly, she taught him to hide his true nature from others. "People aren't ready to believe in dragons," she explained one afternoon as they practiced his display mode, going completely still when strangers were around. "They'd be frightened, or they'd want to take you away for study." Pip learned quickly. He was curious about everything: how the television worked, why plants grew toward the sun, why Eleanor's hair was turning more silver each month. He helped in the garden, his small claws perfect for delicate weeding, and warmed himself by the fireplace in the evenings while Eleanor read aloud. It should have been perfect. But 3 months ago, the nightmares began. Pip would wake screaming in a language Eleanor didn't recognize, his wings fully extended, his tiny claws leaving gouges in the hardwood floor. He never remembered the dreams, but they left him shaken for hours afterward. "It's like something is trying to claw its way out of my mind," he confided to Eleanor one morning after a particularly bad episode. "There are voices, other dragons, but I can't quite reach them." Eleanor stroked the sensitive spot behind his left horn, a gesture that always calmed him. "Maybe it's your memory trying to return. Sometimes trauma can block memories, and they surface when the mind is ready." "But what if I don't want to remember?" Pip asked, his voice small. "What if whatever happened was too terrible?" Eleanor didn't have an answer for that. She only knew that their peaceful life together felt increasingly fragile, as if something was coming that would change everything. She had no idea how right she was. As autumn arrived, Eleanor noticed other changes in Pip. He'd grown restless, often standing at the windows and staring into the distance with a look of longing she couldn't understand. Sometimes she caught him humming melodies that seemed to come from nowhere, complex harmonies that made her spine tingle. "Where do those songs come from?" she asked one evening. Pip paused mid-hum, looking surprised. I don't know. They just feel familiar." It was becoming clear that Pip's lost memories weren't just personal, they were calling to him, growing stronger despite the trauma that had locked them away. Eleanor began to worry that their quiet life together was living on borrowed time. But she had no idea that the answers they sought were waiting for them in the most ordinary of places, the local mega mart, in the toy aisle, hidden in plain sight among children's playthings. The shopping trip. The washing machine breaking on a Tuesday morning seemed like the least of Eleanor's problems, but it forced a decision she'd been avoiding. Pip needed special detergent for his bedding, regular soap irritated his scales, and after 3 nights of him accidentally setting off the smoke alarm with his sleep-heated breath, she couldn't put off the shopping trip any longer. "Do we really have to go to that place with all the strange smells and bright lights?" Pip grumbled as Eleanor helped him into the modified child's jacket that concealed his folded wings. "Unless you prefer sleeping on sheets covered in scale dust and ember burns," Eleanor replied, adjusting the Velcro strips she'd sewn into strategic slits. "And we both need to get out. You've been having more nightmares." Pip's crest flattened against his head. "I don't want to talk about that." Eleanor's voice softened. "I know, but staying hidden in the house won't make them go away. Sometimes fresh air and a change of scenery help." The drive to Mega Mart was quiet, Pip curled up in his travel carrier, trying to nap despite his obvious anxiety. Eleanor had been making these trips for 16 months now, and they'd developed a routine. Pip would ride in the shopping cart, pretending to be an elaborate toy while Eleanor handled the necessities of their strange life together. Inside the store, fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Eleanor navigated the crowded aisles. Pip peered over the edge of the cart with enormous amber eyes, pupils dilating as they adjusted to the harsh lighting. "I'm hungry," he grumbled quietly, his voice barely audible over the store's background noise. "You promised snacks." 29 more minutes of good behavior, then snacks, Eleanor whispered back, checking her watch. "That was our deal." They were making good progress through her shopping list when Doug, a young employee with an overeager smile, spotted them. His name tag caught the light as he approached, clearly fascinated by what he assumed was an incredibly realistic toy. "That's quite a collectible you've got there," Doug said, leaning in for a closer look. "The detail is incredible, those scales almost look like they're breathing. What company made it?" Eleanor felt Pip go completely still beneath her hand. "Custom made," she replied with practiced ease. "My grandson is very particular about his toys. Small artisan workshop, I believe they've closed now. It was a special commission." Doug nodded appreciatively, reluctantly backing away. "Lucky kid. Well, let me know if you need help finding anything else." Once he was out of earshot, Pip relaxed minutely. "I believe we should expedite our shopping," he muttered through barely moving lips. Eleanor nodded and turned the cart toward the toy section, a shortcut to the grocery aisle where she needed to pick up a few more items. "Just a few more things and we'll be." She stopped mid-sentence as Pip made a strange, strangled sound. His entire body had gone rigid, his eyes fixed on something in the middle aisle display. Following his gaze, Eleanor saw a colorful array of children's toys, specifically a row of boxed figurines labeled collectible lab creatures. The figurine front and center was a small dragon, nearly identical to Pip but with blue scales instead of green. "Pip?" Eleanor whispered, alarmed by his reaction. The small dragon was trembling, his pupils dilated to perfect circles, something she'd never seen before. When he spoke, his voice carried a resonance that made nearby plastic packages vibrate slightly. "Ember," he whispered, the word clearly not English. Then his eyes rolled back, and Pip collapsed in the cart. Eleanor's veterinarian training kicked in immediately. She checked his pulse, rapid but steady, and his breathing, which was shallow but regular. Around them, shoppers continued their mundane errands, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the toy aisle. Abandoning her cart, Eleanor lifted Pip carefully and carried him to her car. His small body was limp but warm, and she could feel his heartbeat against her chest. Whatever had happened, it wasn't a medical emergency, it was something else entirely. As she drove home, Pip began to stir. When he finally opened his eyes, they held something that hadn't been there before, recognition. "I remember," he whispered, his voice shaky but filled with wonder and terror. "Eleanor, I remember." She pulled into their driveway and turned to face him. "What do you remember?" "Ember. That dragon in the toy, her name was Ember. She was my clutch mate. We were together in the laboratory." Eleanor felt her world tilt. "Laboratory?" "Project Akira," Pip said, the words coming in a rush as fragmented memories reassembled themselves. "Adaptive kinetic intelligence, reptilian assets. We were weapons, Eleanor. Created weapons." The implications hit Eleanor like a physical blow. The metal device she'd removed from Pip's skull, his complete memory loss, the wound that had nearly killed him, it all suddenly made horrible sense. "How many of you were there?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral despite the fear she could feel coursing through her veins. 14. I think I was number 4. Pip pressed his tiny claws against his temples. "There was a breakout, someone helped us escape. I got separated from the others. There was an impact, pain, then nothing until your garden." Eleanor nodded slowly. "The wound on your head when I found you. And the metal object I removed, you never mentioned anything about that before." "You removed something?" Pip's voice sharpened with alarm. "A small device embedded at the base of your skull. It was leaking fluid that seemed to be causing inflammation. I assumed it was shrapnel from whatever injured you." More memories surfaced, and Pip's expression grew grim. "Neural limiters. Memory suppression biotech. They kept us controlled, compliant." He looked at Eleanor with new understanding. "You didn't just save my life, you freed my mind." The weight of what they'd discovered settled between them. Pip wasn't just a mythical creature who'd wandered into Eleanor's garden. He was a refugee from something far more sinister, a victim of experiments that turned living beings into weapons. "We need to go back to the store," Pip said suddenly, his voice urgent. "Those toys, they're not random. Someone is trying to send a message." Eleanor looked skeptical, but the evidence was undeniable. Pip's memories had returned the moment he'd seen that figurine. Messages from whom? "I don't know yet," Pip admitted. "But seeing that toy of Ember triggered something. The memories are clearer now, and I need to see the display again." As they drove back to Mega Mart, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that their quiet life was about to end forever. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't let anyone harm Pip again, no matter what he'd been created for. The truth was waiting for them in the toy aisle, hidden among children's playthings like a secret message in plain sight. The hidden messages. Back at Mega Mart, Eleanor concealed Pip in a large shopping bag with carefully punched air holes. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed a new cart toward the toy section, the weight of their discovery making every step feel momentous. "There," Pip whispered from inside the bag, his voice muffled but urgent. "The dragon display." Eleanor approached the collectible lab creatures section with new eyes. What had seemed like innocent children's toys now felt sinister, laden with hidden meaning. The dragon figurines were arranged in a neat row, each one unique in color and design. "Count them," Pip instructed quietly. Eleanor's breath caught. 14. There are exactly 14 different dragons. It's them. Pip's voice was filled with a mixture of excitement and dread. "My clutch mates. Someone is trying to find us, or help us find each other." Each figurine was beautifully crafted, with details that seemed too specific to be coincidental. Eleanor could see why Doug had been so impressed by what he'd assumed was Pip's custom design. These toys were perfect replicas. This one, Pip's voice grew soft with emotion, is Ember. Number 7. Her scales changed color with her mood, deep blue when she was sad, bright turquoise when she was happy. Eleanor picked up the blue-scaled figurine, studying its intricate details. And this one? Glide. Number 3. He had the largest wingspan of all of us, could stay airborne longer than anyone else. Pip's voice cracked slightly. He used to tell us stories about the world outside, places he'd dreamed of seeing. One by one, Pip identified his former clutch mates. Each figurine brought back memories, fragments of shared experiences, whispered conversations in the dark, small rebellions against their captors. Eleanor felt her heart breaking for the small dragon in her bag, for all the young creatures who had endured such treatment. "We need to buy them," Pip said finally. "All of them. There might be more information hidden in the packaging." Eleanor glanced around nervously. Purchasing 14 identical toys would certainly draw attention, but they had no choice. She gathered the figurines and headed to the checkout, preparing a story about having grandchildren who collected these particular toys. The cashier, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, barely glanced at the items as she scanned them. "Someone's going to have a very happy birthday," she commented absently. "Something like that," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Back home, Eleanor spread the box toys across her kitchen table while Pip circled them, his crest fully extended with excitement and nervous energy. Each figurine was a perfect representation of dragons he'd known, friends he'd lost in the chaos of their escape. "Look at this," Eleanor said, examining the packaging more carefully. "There's a QR code on the back of each box, partially concealed within the design." Pip's eyes widened. "Can you scan them?" Eleanor retrieved her tablet, hands shaking slightly as she opened the camera app. The first code she scanned, from Ember's box, initially showed nothing. Then her screen flickered, and displayed a string of coordinates followed by a date and time exactly 1 week in the future. "It's a meeting location," Pip breathed, his voice filled with wonder and terror. Eleanor scanned the remaining codes. Each contained similar information, different locations, all scheduled for the same date and time. When she reached the green dragon figurine, clearly meant to represent Pip, the coordinates showed a location less than 50 miles from their home. "This can't be coincidence," Eleanor said, her veterinarian's pragmatism warring with the impossible reality before her. "Someone knows exactly where each of you ended up." "Which means we've been watched," Pip finished, his voice grim. "Possibly since the beginning." Eleanor sank into her chair, the full implications washing over her. "The question is, by whom? The people who created you, or someone trying to help?" Pip studied the figurines with new understanding. The laboratory had strict security protocols. Even if someone wanted to help us during our captivity, they would have needed access to detailed records to know what we looked like, where we went after the escape. "But they would also need to know about your memory loss," Eleanor pointed out. "Otherwise, why go through such an elaborate scheme? Why not just contact you directly?" "Because they knew about the neurolimiters," Pip said slowly. "They knew we wouldn't remember who we were, but they also knew that seeing familiar faces might trigger our memories." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. "Which means they know about the devices being removed. They might even know about me." The thought that they'd been observed for 16 months, that their quiet life together had been monitored by unknown parties, was deeply unsettling. But there was something even more troubling about the coordination required to place these figurines in stores across the country. "We have a choice to make," Pip said quietly. "We can ignore this and hope whoever is behind it gives up, or we can go to the meeting." Eleanor looked at the small dragon who had become her family, her heart aching with the decision ahead. "If we go, we might be walking into a trap. If we don't, you might never see your clutch mates again." "I know," Pip replied. "But Eleanor, I can't live with the not knowing anymore. The nightmares, the fragments of memory, they're getting stronger. If there's a chance to find the others, to understand what happened to us, I have to take it. Eleanor nodded slowly, understanding the weight of his words. As much as she wanted to protect their peaceful life, she knew that peace built on incomplete truths was fragile at best. Then we'll go, she said finally. But we go prepared. We'll scout the location first, have an escape plan ready. And Pip, if anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. Agreed, Pip said, then paused. Eleanor. Thank you. For everything. For saving me, for giving me a home, for loving me when I had no one else. Eleanor reached out and gently stroked the spot behind his horn that always calmed him. You're my family, Pip. We face this together. As they prepared for bed that night, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing at a crossroads. The choice they'd made would either lead to reunions and answers, or to dangers they couldn't yet imagine. But looking at Pip, seeing the hope in his amber eyes for the first time since his nightmares began, she knew they'd made the right decision. Whatever awaited them at those coordinates, they would face it as they had faced everything else, together. The week ahead would be the longest of their lives together, filled with preparation and growing anticipation. But for now, they had each other, and they had hope. Sometimes, that was enough. The reunion. The coordinates led them to an abandoned veterinary clinic on the outskirts of the next county, a detail that wasn't lost on Eleanor. The irony felt deliberate, as if someone knew about her background and had chosen the location specifically. They arrived an hour early, parking behind a grove of oak trees where Eleanor could observe the building through binoculars. The clinic had been closed for years, its windows dark and parking lot cracked with weeds. It looked like the perfect place for either a heartwarming reunion or an elaborate trap. I smell something familiar, Pip whispered from his position crouched low in the passenger seat. His pupils had contracted to thin slits, and the small spines along his back were slightly raised, signs of both excitement and caution. Other dragons? Eleanor asked. Maybe. The scent is faint, but... Pip paused, his head tilting as if listening to something Eleanor couldn't hear. There's someone coming. A small sedan pulled into the parking lot, and Eleanor watched through her binoculars as an elderly man emerged from the driver's side. He moved carefully, as if his joints pained him, and carried what looked like a pet carrier. When he set it down and opened it, Eleanor's breath caught. A dragon emerged, copper-scaled with unusually large wings, exactly matching the figurine they'd seen in the store. Glide, Pip whispered, his voice filled with wonder. It's really him. Over the next 30 minutes, more vehicles arrived. Each brought a guardian, mostly older people, Eleanor noticed, and a dragon. Each dragon was unique, perfectly matching the figurines from the toy store. Eleanor watched through her binoculars as the small group gathered in the clinic's overgrown parking lot, dragons and humans alike seeming nervous but hopeful. 13, Pip counted quietly. Everyone except us. Eleanor made her decision. Ready? Pip nodded, and they emerged from their hiding spot. As they approached the group, Eleanor noticed something remarkable happening. The dragons were communicating through a complex series of crest movements and tail positions, a language Pip had never mentioned but seemed to understand instinctively. The reunion was unlike anything Eleanor had ever witnessed. Dragons who had been separated for over a year rushed toward each other with cries of joy and recognition. Pip launched himself toward the blue-scaled dragon, Ember, and they embraced with their small arms, making harmonious sounds that seemed to resonate in Eleanor's chest. But it was the humans who surprised Eleanor most. Like her, they were primarily older adults, retirees who had found injured dragons and nursed them back to health. A former teacher named Margaret had found Glide caught in a fence line with a broken wing. A retired mechanic called Bobby had discovered his dragon, Spark, nearly drowned in a creek after a storm. We all received the same invitation, explained Margaret, holding up a figurine identical to the ones Eleanor had purchased. Someone left this on my doorstep 3 weeks ago with a note saying my lost pet might want to see old friends. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a pediatrician in her 70s, had found her dragon, a sleek black one called Shadow, collapsed in her backyard garden. I removed a strange device from his skull during treatment, she said. Some kind of electronic implant that was causing neurological issues. Every story was similar: dragons found injured and memoryless, small metal devices removed during treatment, gradual recovery, and bonding with their human rescuers. It was as if someone had orchestrated not just their escape, but their placement with people who would provide proper care. But who arranged all this? Eleanor asked. Who knew where to find us, and how to coordinate this meeting? The answer came from an unexpected source. Shadow, Dr. Martinez's dragon, approached the group with something clutched in his small claws, a tablet computer. On the screen was a video message, and Eleanor recognized the face immediately. It was the woman from Pip's recovered memories, the scientist who had sometimes smuggled extra food to the laboratory subjects. My name is Dr. Rebecca Chen, the recorded message began. If you're watching this, it means the dragons have recovered enough of their memories to respond to the reunion signals I've been placing in stores across the region. The video continued, revealing a story of conscience and carefully planned rebellion. Dr. Chen had worked on Project Akira for 3 years, gradually becoming horrified by the treatment of the dragon subjects. She'd spent months planning their escape, identifying potential guardians in rural areas who had the skills and compassion needed to care for injured creatures. I couldn't save them all, Dr. Chen's image admitted, her voice heavy with regret. But I managed to get 14 out during the chaos of the facility's destruction. I placed memory suppressors in their neural limiters before the escape, not to control them, but to protect them from the trauma of their captivity until they were safe and healing. Eleanor felt tears forming in her eyes as the full scope of Dr. Chen's sacrifice became clear. The woman had given up her career, her freedom, and possibly her life to save creatures that most people would dismiss as monsters or weapons. The suppressors were designed to degrade over time, the message continued. As they failed, memories would gradually return. I hoped their new families would help them process these memories, would give them the love and stability they needed to heal. But Dr. Chen's message carried a warning as well. The government facility that had created the dragons was gone, destroyed in the escape, but other agencies were still searching for the subjects. The reunion was both a celebration and a goodbye. Staying together would make them easier to find. You have a choice to make, Dr. Chen's recorded voice said. You can return to your separate lives, keeping the dragons hidden and safe. Or you can come forward, tell your story, and fight for recognition of their rights as sentient beings. Both paths have risks. As the message ended, the group fell silent. Eleanor looked around at the other guardians, seeing her own conflict reflected in their faces. They had all grown to love their dragon companions, had built lives together that felt complete and precious. But they had also seen what their dragons had endured, and the thought of others somewhere in captivity was unbearable. I think, said Bobby, his scarred hands gentle on Spark's copper head, that we need to tell their story. Not just for our dragons, but for any others that might still be out there. One by one, the other guardians nodded their agreement. Margaret wiped tears from her eyes as she hugged Glide. Dr. Martinez straightened her shoulders with the determination Eleanor recognized from her own years in veterinary practice. Then we do this together, Eleanor said. We document everything, we gather evidence, and we make sure the world knows what happened. And we make sure it never happens again. As the sun set over the abandoned clinic, 14 dragons and their human families made a pact that would change everything. They would no longer hide in the shadows. They would step into the light, and they would ensure that Dr. Chen's sacrifice meant something. The quiet chapter of their lives was ending, but a new story was just beginning, one of courage, love, and the fight for justice that would span species and transform how the world viewed the creatures it had tried to weaponize. Tomorrow, they would begin the work of changing everything. But tonight, they were simply families reunited, celebrating the bonds that had grown stronger than the forces that had tried to break them. The new beginning. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in a television studio in Washington, D.C., adjusting Pip's small bow tie one final time. The interview that would air in 20 minutes would be their third major media appearance, but her hands still trembled with nervous energy. "You don't have to be nervous," Pip whispered, his voice barely audible over the bustle of the production crew. "We've told this story before." "I know," Eleanor replied softly. "But it still feels surreal." The path from that reunion at the abandoned clinic to this moment had been anything but easy. The group had spent weeks documenting their dragon stories, gathering medical evidence, and consulting with lawyers about the best way to reveal the truth about Project Akira. The breakthrough had come when Dr. Martinez contacted a former colleague who worked for a congressional oversight committee. Within days, their story had escalated from local news curiosity to a national investigation that reached the highest levels of government. The public reaction had been extraordinary. Far from the fear and rejection they had worried about, most people had responded with outrage at the treatment the dragons had endured and admiration for the guardians who had saved them. Children drew pictures of Pip and his clutchmates. Scientists offered to study the dragons' unique abilities in ethical, voluntary research programs. Animal rights groups rallied to establish legal protections for all genetically modified sentient beings. But the real victory had come 3 weeks ago, when Shadow's exceptional memory and Dr. Chen's hidden files had led authorities to a second facility. They had found and liberated 6 more dragons, subjects from a newer program who hadn't yet had their memories suppressed. "Dr. Chen saved them too," Pip had said when they heard the news. "Even from wherever she is now, she's still saving us." Dr. Chen herself remained missing, her fate unknown. Some believed she had gone into hiding, while others feared she had been silenced by those who wanted Project Akira's secrets buried. But her legacy lived on in every dragon she had freed and every life she had touched. The studio lights came up, and Eleanor took her place on the interview set beside Margaret, Bobby, and Dr. Martinez. Their dragons perched on specially designed platforms that allowed them to participate in the conversation, a setup that would have been impossible to imagine a year ago. "We're live in 5, 4, 3. The director counted down. "Good evening, I'm Janet Morrison," the host began, "and tonight we continue our series on the Project Akira revelations with the remarkable families who've become advocates for a new kind of civil rights." Eleanor listened as Margaret explained how Glide was now working with atmospheric scientists to understand weather patterns from a dragon's perspective. Dr. Martinez described Shadow's contributions to a study on memory formation and recovery. Bobby beamed with pride as he talked about Spark's artwork, intricate metal sculptures that had been featured in 3 galleries. When the host turned to Eleanor, she felt a familiar calm settle over her. This was their story, and she would tell it with the same care she had given to every patient in her veterinary practice. "Pip isn't just my companion," she said, watching her small dragon nod encouragingly. "He's taught me that family isn't about biology or species, it's about love, trust, and choosing to stand by each other no matter what comes." "And what comes next for all of you?" the host asked. Pip stepped forward slightly, his voice clear and confident as he answered. "We continue to heal. We continue to learn. And we make sure that no one else endures what we went through." Eleanor smiled, remembering the frightened, injured creature she had found in her garden. That dragon was gone, replaced by this articulate, confident individual who spoke for his clutch mates and advocated for others who couldn't speak for themselves. After the interview, Eleanor and Pip returned to their hotel room overlooking the Potomac River. The city lights sparkled below them, but Eleanor found herself thinking of their quiet home in the country, of the garden where this all began. "Do you miss it?" she asked Pip as he perched on the windowsill. "The simple life we had before all this?" Pip considered the question carefully, as he did most things these days. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Those months with you, learning to read by the fireplace, helping in the garden, they were the first truly peaceful moments of my life." He turned to face her, his amber eyes reflecting the city lights. "But I wouldn't trade what we have now. My clutch mates are free. Other dragons have been saved. And we've proven that beings like us can contribute to the world rather than just survive in it. Eleanor nodded, understanding completely. Their advocacy work had brought them to places they'd never imagined, introduced them to people whose lives had been touched by their story. Letters arrived daily from children who'd been inspired by Pip's journey, from scientists eager to collaborate, from other families who'd found unusual creatures and chose compassion over fear. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Dr. Martinez's voice crackled through the speaker, excitement evident despite the late hour. "Eleanor, you need to see the news. They found her, they found Dr. Chen." Eleanor's heart raced as she turned on the television. The breaking news banner read, "Project Akira whistleblower found alive in protected custody." The report showed a woman emerging from a federal courthouse, flanked by U.S. Marshals, her face older and more weathered than in the video message they'd watched months ago. "Dr. Rebecca Chen has been in witness protection for the past 18 months, the reporter explained, providing testimony that has led to indictments of 7 former government officials involved in illegal genetic experimentation programs. Pip made a sound Eleanor had never heard before, a complex harmony that seemed to contain joy, relief, and gratitude all at once. On the screen, Dr. Chen paused at the courthouse steps and looked directly into the camera. "To the 14 dragons and the families who saved them," she said, her voice steady despite the obvious emotion, "thank you for having the courage to tell your story. You've made sure their sacrifice meant something." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her cheeks as the report continued. Dr. Chen would be entering a formal witness protection program, but she had specifically requested the opportunity to meet with the dragon families before disappearing into her new life. That meeting took place 2 weeks later, in a secure government facility that felt nothing like the sterile laboratory from Pip's memories. Dr. Chen looked smaller than Eleanor had imagined, but her eyes held the same determination that had saved her dragons. "I never expected to see any of you again," Dr. Chen said as the dragons surrounded her. Ember nuzzled against her arm while Glide perched on her shoulder. "I hoped you would find good homes, but I never dreamed you would find families who would love you enough to fight for you." She turned to the human guardians with tears in her eyes. "You gave them what I couldn't, not just safety, but belonging. You've shown the world that love transcends every boundary we think we understand." The meeting was brief, security concerns limiting their time together. But as Dr. Chen prepared to leave for her new identity and protected life, she handed Eleanor a small wrapped package. "For Pip," she said simply. "Something I saved from before." Later, back in their hotel room, Eleanor and Pip unwrapped the package together. Inside was a small, intricately carved wooden figurine, a dragon with emerald scales, wings spread in flight. On the base was engraved a single word, freedom. "She carved this while we were still in the laboratory," Pip said softly, his voice filled with wonder. "I remember seeing her work on it during her breaks. I never thought I'd see it again." Eleanor placed the figurine on the nightstand beside their bed. "It's a reminder," she said, "of how far you've come, and of the person who made it possible." Over the following months, their lives settled into a new routine. They returned to their countryside home, but it was no longer isolated. Regular visitors came to learn from Pip, to interview Eleanor about her experiences, and to see the garden where it all began. The dragons had formed a council of sorts, meeting monthly to discuss their ongoing integration into human society and to advocate for others like them. Laws were passed recognizing their status as sentient beings with full legal protections. Research programs were established, all voluntary, all transparent, all designed to benefit both dragons and humanity. Pip had grown too, not just in size but in confidence and purpose. He testified before Congress about the need for ethical oversight in genetic research. He collaborated with linguists studying dragon communication patterns. He even helped design new homes for the dragons they continue to rescue from hidden facilities around the world. But perhaps most importantly, he remained Eleanor's family. They still read together by the fireplace on cold evenings. He still helped in the garden, his claws now expert at the delicate work of transplanting seedlings. And sometimes, on quiet nights, they would sit on the porch and remember the simple days when their biggest worry was whether the local store had Pip's special detergent in stock. One evening, as autumn painted the trees around their home in brilliant colors, Eleanor found Pip sitting in the garden where she had first discovered him. He was holding Dr. Chen's carved figurine, turning it over in his small claws. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd never found you?" Eleanor asked, settling beside him on the bench they'd built together. Pip considered this, as he considered all important questions. "I think," he said finally, "that somehow, someway, we would have found each other. Some bonds are too strong for chance to break." Eleanor smiled, watching the sun set over the garden that had changed both their lives. "I think you're right." As the stars appeared overhead, 14 dragon families across the country were settling in for the night, safe, loved, and free. Dr. Chen, wherever she was under her new identity, could rest knowing that her courage had not only saved lives but had changed the world's understanding of what family could be. And in a quiet country home, an elderly veterinarian and a small dragon who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances continued to prove that love, courage, and compassion could overcome any obstacle. Their story had begun with a wounded creature in a garden. It had grown into a movement that spanned nations and species. But at its heart, it remained beautifully simple. Sometimes the most extraordinary families are the ones we choose, and sometimes the greatest courage comes from simply refusing to abandon those we love. The end.